coronavirus classroom. I'm Jessica Jacob, and this is another ridiculous review from my living room. My little guy's asleep, which is why I'm being quiet. But I remember to have this mic. So, what we're reviewing is the autonomic nervous system, which is your, regulating everything you're going to talk about next semester. So, I thought a good way to review it might be to introduce you to the systems you're going to learn next semester, and then just quickly ask you to review what you learned about how the autonomic nervous system is going to regulate them. So let's do that. Okay. So, wonderful. I think we should be good to go. Now, let's think about it. The first system that you should talk about in anybody's class is the endocrine system. And as far as the autonomic nervous system goes as a controller of the endocrine system, or what it does is really it only has one direct interaction with the endocrine system, and that's because the endocrine system is our other major controller. The nervous system is our really fast, kind of short-term, quick controller, and the endocrine system is our longer-term homeostatic controller. It controls things like growth and reproduction. So really the only example that we'll talk about for the effect of the sympathetic or of the autonomic nervous system on the endocrine system is through what the sympathetic division does. And what's that? So let's actually make a little chart here. So here we'll say this is our system from 202, and then we'll think about what our sympathetic nervous system does in that system and what our parasympathetic nervous system does in that system. So if the first system is the endocrine system, we said that the sympathetic nervous system had these extensions that led away, and this was the only example where we didn't have a two-motor neuron chain in our autonomic nervous system. Instead of having a pre and a postganglionic neuron at the adrenal medulla, what happens is your preganglionic neuron extends all the way away and synapses right on the adrenal medulla. So it's endocrine, the gland is the adrenal medulla, and when the sympathetic nervous system stimulates the adrenal medulla, then it's going to release epinephrine as a hormone, and to a lesser degree some norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is what's being used as the neurotransmitter at all of the targets other than this one. And so that brings me to a question. This is a preganglionic neuron. What type of neurons are all of our preganglionic neurons? They're all cholinergic. So that means here, this neuron is releasing acetylcholine onto my adrenal medulla, and I'm stimulating the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine. Which cholinergic receptor is always stimulatory? Nicotinic. So that's what's happening here, is that I have acetylcholine binding to a nicotinic acetylcholine receptor on the adrenal medulla, and that will result in epinephrine and norepinephrine release, so that these will now enter the blood and be able to hit all of the targets and hit other receptors. So this is not an adrenergic receptor right here. This will be an adrenergic receptor. All of our epinephrine and norepinephrine that's being released into the blood is going to be able to hit any target that has adrenergic receptors and have an effect. The norepinephrine that is being released from the sympathetic nervous system is crossing the small distance of the synapse and binding adrenergic receptors that are going to cause all of the overall effects that we talked about in your last class. So, okay, what else? I wish I had kind of picked a different color because this is the exception. So maybe we'll just go with pink for that, and I'll say my sympathetic nervous system we'll do in red. And the reason I'm doing pink here is because, and I'll do red, oh, not that red. This is a rocket red. I'll do orange. My sympathetic nervous system is using norepinephrine at the targets primarily. What is going on here? All the technology in the house just stopped working. I don't know. You can't hear me when I'm holding the mic in my hand. I'm sorry, people. Okay, so our sympathetic nervous system, this one weird thing is that it uses acetylcholine there. And all of the rest of our targets, we're going to be using norepinephrine as the neurotransmitter. Okay, so let's look at this. What are the other systems that you're going to look at next semester? You're going to leave the endocrine system. And if you're with me, we'll talk about the reproductive system right away. And that's because the reproductive system is controlled by the endocrine system. As you learned yesterday, the only time that our sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions are working together is in the sexual response. So for our reproductive system, we could say that. The parasympathetic nervous system is going to be in control of the arousal phase, which is when we get secretions going and when we get the blood flow going, the blood flow changes going so that we can produce erection. So the parasympathetic division is in control of arousal. The sympathetic division is going to be in control of ejaculation and resolution in males. Just orgasm in females. There's no resolution in females. We'll talk more about that next semester, okay? All right, so most teachers teach that at the end. It would be all the way down here. Just like I changed this semester with good reason, I changed next semester with good reason. And so anyway, after that, you'll look at the cardiovascular system. So cardiovascular system, what's in the cardiovascular system? Well, we've got our heart, our blood, and our blood vessels that are transporting that blood around. So at our heart, what did we say that the sympathetic nervous system did to the heart? It increased heart rate, right? It also increased force of contraction. So for the sympathetic nervous system, what we could say at the cardiovascular system that you're going to learn about next semester, which is why we're doing autonomic nervous system right now, is here. At the heart, we would increase heart rate and we would increase force of contraction. The blood is going to be carrying around this epinephrine, so that's just one thing that you could kind of think. The other thing though, like here, our vasomotor tone is set by the sympathetic division, so that there's a baseline level of tone to our blood vessels so that the sympathetic nervous system can quickly shunt blood from one area to the other if we are in an emergency situation. So for our blood vessels, we could say that our sympathetic nervous system, for example, when we have sympathetic nervous system activation, where do we want to bring more blood? What organs? To our skeletal muscles, right? So we can fight or flee. And we want to shunt blood away from our visceral organs. So blood vessels as a target, it depends on which organ you're looking at. And how is it possible that we could have an increase in blood flow to skeletal muscle, but a decrease in blood flow to, let's say, my GI tract? Well, like where I would be doing dressing and digesting. How is it possible that the same hormone could cause these different effects? Sorry, how is it possible that the same neurotransmitter could cause these different effects? It's because we have different receptors at the target, right? Okay, so that brings me back to a good point. Now that we're looking away from this exception, what we would see in our sympathetic division is we have these short preganglionic neurons that are synapsing on their postganglionic neurons in the sympathetic trunk. Those preganglionic neurons are cholinergic. The postganglionic neurons are adrenergic. They have cholinergic receptors because they have to be able to respond to acetylcholine. Specifically, they have nicotinic cholinergic receptors that are going to be stimulatory. That's going to cause those adrenergic neurons to fire an action potential that will result in the release of norepinephrine. Okay, norepinephrine is going to bind to adrenergic receptors, and the different type of receptor you have at the different target is going to determine the effect. Okay, so, all right, well, let's think about what the parasympathetic nervous system can do at the cardiovascular system. After you've had an increase in heart rate and a sympathetic response and you need to correct, then the parasympathetic nervous system can bring you back down. So your parasympathetic nervous system can decrease your heart rate. It does not have an effect on the force of contraction, and really there's not an effect on your blood vasculature. All right, then you're going to move away from the cardiovascular system and you're going to move to the respiratory, lymphatic, immune, and then respiratory. So next, your lymphatic and immune systems. And this is actually like something that's kind of cool. We didn't talk about those at all, did we? No, because your nervous system doesn't really have anything to do with your lymphatic and immune system, which is pretty cool, and why I think the endocrine system might be the better controller. Because you know who does have something to do with it, or who can have an effect? Your hormones. Let me tell you, when you're stressed out, you know what's going down? Your immunity. So, yeah, we'll just kind of put that in our back pocket. Just want to make sure. I mean, no, we're gonna leave it at that. As far as things that you need to worry about for why, like how we're reviewing this system and why we've done it this way, the next system that you'll talk about is the respiratory system. Okay, and what did we say that the sympathetic nervous system did at lungs? It increased our respiratory rate, right? So we increase our respiration rate, but we also do bronchodilation. So this will stimulate bronchodilation. And the example I gave you to help you remember this is what an epi shot is doing. If you've ever heard, oh, I've got to carry, my brother has a peanut allergy, so he's got to carry an EpiPen. An EpiPen is epinephrine. Epinephrine is the adrenaline that comes from your adrenal medulla. But your sympathetic nervous system is releasing norepinephrine, binding adrenergic receptors, doing all the same things. Bronchodilation is one thing that it does, so that we can breathe faster through wider bronchioles, so we can have more oxygen availability for this increased heart rate that we're going to have, this increased blood flow that we're going to have, and all this stuff that we're going to be doing. So that's exactly when you're in anaphylactic shock, you're having this severe allergic reaction in your you experience bronchoconstriction and you can't breathe. If you real quick grab an EpiPen, stick it in your thigh, you bronchodilate and you can breathe again. Okay, so that's what your sympathetic nervous system does. Your parasympathetic nervous system would just do the opposite. This would decrease your respiration rate after you had a sympathetic response. You could also say, like, even if you were just at your normal respiration rate right now, but you wanted to like meditate and drop it even lower, this would be where your cerebrum can override and send commands down to your hypothalamus that can override and send commands down to your pontine respiratory group, which is going to override what's going on through the medulla oblongata, and then we'll be able to execute an even lower through the branch coming off of the vagus nerve. It branches into the phrenic nerve that helps with your respiration rate. So sure, you could be at rest and drop your respiration rate even more through this whole chain of events. But if, let's say, you had a sympathetic emergency situation and you just needed to come back to rest, that's also going to be an example where your parasympathetic nervous system is going to come in and it will decrease your respiration rate. It can also then correct after bronchodilation by stimulating bronchoconstriction. Okay, next system. I was going to grab my pointer, like I can point at myself for the next system. Lymphatic, immune, respiratory, then we do digestive, urinary. Is that it? I think so. So for the digestive system, I'm going to have to count people. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I feel like we're missing something. Oh, integument. Okay, that was the semester. Yeah, we're good. Okay, so the digestive system, we said, man, pardon me, that the parasympathetic nervous system is in control of rest and digest. So the digestive system, we actually have a gut brain, the enteric nervous system. So most of digestion is handled like all there in your guts. If you've got to do some like little reflex to get bile released because your small intestine senses an increase in lipids, you can handle that all in the gut brain. But if we need to do things that are like going to increase secretion and motility of the stomach, increase secretion of your salivary production, saliva, your salivary glands, all of that stuff is going to be parasympathetic nervous system, right? We said the parasympathetic nervous system was really juicy. What are the targets that we would be affecting in the digestive system? Well, it would start in the salivary glands. We would turn them on. We would turn on motility and secretion in the stomach. We would turn on motility and secretion in the small intestine. We would turn on motility in the large intestine. We could stimulate defecation in the large intestine. So the parasympathetic nervous system really is the boss of this. And we could think that this is going to be able to stimulate secretion and motility throughout the digestive system. And then for the urinary system, urinary system is crazy complex. So actually, let's come back to sympathetic nervous system and digestion and move over. What would sympathetic nervous system do to our digestive system? Well, it would shunt our blood away and we would inhibit it. So if we're thinking about what the sympathetic nervous system would do with the stomach, it's going to inhibit gastric motility and secretion. Or we could say, and just inhibit all of our motility and secretion in our digestive system. Our sympathetic nervous system, though, would stimulate the liver to do glycogenolysis. So we could break down our stored glycogen and release it so that we've got glucose to fuel all of this high energy stuff that we're doing. So that we could say that here at the digestive system, we would inhibit motility and secretion, but we would stimulate the liver to do glycogenolysis. That's kind of the most important stuff. We're going to shunt the blood away from the digestive organs when the sympathetic nervous system is involved. Urinary system, again, this is kind of like here, this is kind of cool because one of the things and like with blood that I almost mentioned is blood can really be used in the sympathetic nervous system to increase blood pressure, which sounds kind of weird, but if you have an increase in blood volume, you get an increase in blood pressure. And so one of the ways we can increase blood volume is to decrease urine output. So when you've got sympathetic nervous system stimulation going on, your urinary system can actually respond, and we're going to do everything possible to reclaim as much water as possible and to stop urine production so that we have a lot of blood so that we can maintain blood pressure. So if like thinking about what the sympathetic nervous system would do, it would inhibit urine formation and micturition. And then for the parasympathetic nervous system, this is going to stimulate micturition or the urination response. Okay? All right, so that's the wrap up. And you might be saying, why is she standing here like with makeup on, disheveled hair, and half pajamas? Because remember people, reviews from living rooms are ridiculous. And I'm going ridiculous today because it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I am still in yesterday's pajamas. So on that note, I'll erase this board and ask you some questions. All right. So I may have asked this question in class, but there are 2 ways to ask this question, and I don't know which way I asked it in class. There are probably lots of ways to ask this question. We're going to talk about 2, this one and the other way, that I may or may not have asked you. The door shuts loudly behind you and you flinch. Your heart rate increases as a result. This response is due to activation of your blank nervous system. A, autonomic. B, somatic. C, central. D, all of the above. E, A and B only. Yeah, A, autonomic. So the other way to ask this question is the door shuts loudly behind you and you flinch. Your heart rate increases as a result. These responses are due to activation of the blank. And some people would still choose A because you don't necessarily think about the flinch that you're doing. But if it said these responses are due to, both of those responses would be due to activation of the autonomic and the somatic nervous system. If you don't have somatic lower motor neurons synapsing onto skeletal muscles, you don't flinch. Okay? Cool. And I apologize if this seems weird and like a really hard review because I left a lot more of these A and B only questions in here. Your test isn't going to be a lot harder, but I want you to think about how these systems work because they're really important for next semester. I want you to learn how to be good test takers. I really want you to think through good questions and things so we can do this now. I can be hard on you now in your review and then I'll, take it as hard as I will on the exam, which is not going to be super easy because you're going into healthcare, but it's not going to be super horrible because you can learn about really all of the really important stuff next semester when you get into the systems. Okay, spinal nerves that contain axons of autonomic motor neurons arise from which part or parts of the spinal cord? A, the thoracic part, B, the lumbar part, C, the sacral part, D, all of the above. Ooh, I took out the E, A and B only here. I shouldn't have, because that was the distractor, is A and B only. A lot of people forget that the parasympathetic division has nerves that are coming out of the sacral spinal cord. Okay. This lining is just not working out, is it? You could be asking yourself, why doesn't she just do this all the time? And I'm telling you people, there are reasons. I may or may not be able to articulate those reasons, but there are reasons. Okay. In the autonomic nervous system, cholinergic neurons can be found: A, preganglionic neurons; B, postganglionic neurons; C, effector organs; D, all of the above. Yeah, E, A and B only. Yeah, here, A and B only. In the autonomic nervous system, we can find cholinergic neurons as preganglionic neurons in both divisions, and as postganglionic neurons in which division? The parasympathetic division, right? What are postganglionic neurons in the sympathetic division? Adrenergic. Okay, now let me ask this question a different way. In the autonomic nervous system, cholinergic receptors. Oh, that makes it weird. Because I'd have to make this like C, and this like A, B. Okay, but let's look at that. In the autonomic nervous system, cholinergic receptors can be found here. Postganglionic neurons, effector organs, preganglionic neurons, all of the above, A and B only. Think about what we've talked about. And I changed this all because now, if this were the question, then the answer would be A and B only. Why? Well, we haven't talked about at all the receptors that are on preganglionic neurons and what they're responding to from higher brain centers. So we're not going to talk about that right now. What we have talked about is what type of neurons preganglionic neurons are, what type of neurons postganglionic neurons are. So then we've also talked about the receptors on postganglionic neurons, and we've also talked about the receptors on targets. Okay, so in the autonomic nervous system, cholinergic receptors can be found here on all of our postganglionic neurons, all of our postganglionic neurons in both branches, because all of our preganglionic neurons are cholinergic in both branches. The difference comes in our postganglionic neurons. In the sympathetic nervous system, they're adrenergic, but in the parasympathetic nervous system, they're cholinergic. So this still works. Cholinergic receptors can be found on effector organs in the autonomic nervous system, specifically in the parasympathetic nervous system. So, see, I even said, like, this can be asked a couple different ways. It can be asked a million different ways, because the other way that I could ask this question, if I instead change the word up here, in the sympathetic division, cholinergic receptors can be found here. The answer would be postganglionic neurons. If it said in the parasympathetic nervous system, cholinergic receptors could be found where? It would be our postganglionic neurons and our effector organs. So, okay, so hopefully you can see that distinction. I'm trying to teach you how to take tests right now. Test harder than my tests. I wish I could see you in class. I'm going to give you one of my really hard tests. You might love it. You might hate it. You might love or hate whatever we're going through right now. Probably a little bit of both sometimes. Okay. Oh, adrenergic neurons can be found here in the autonomic nervous system. Yeah, you're right. The sympathetic division. So if this said cholinergic, it would be all A and B only, because cholinergic neurons are found in both. Adrenergic neurons are only found in the sympathetic division. How is it possible that norepinephrine can cause vasoconstriction in one location and vasodilation in another? A, sometimes norepinephrine is released by the parasympathetic nervous system, which causes relaxation. B, receptor types differ in the tissues. C, norepinephrine is not released by the parasympathetic nervous system. D, it can't. Its actions are predictable no matter the tissue. Here, receptor types differ in the tissues. Now, this brings up a really good testing thing. There is another true statement in this list of answer choices. What is another true statement? C, norepinephrine is not released by the parasympathetic nervous system. That's true, but that's not what the question is asking. How is it possible that norepinephrine can cause vasoconstriction in one location and vasodilation in another? That is possible because receptor types differ in the tissues. That's the answer. So even though this might be a true statement, it's not answering the question, okay? All right. Which area of the body receives no innervation by the parasympathetic nervous system? A, the heart, B, the sweat glands, C, the bladder, D, all of the above. Yeah, you're right, the sweat glands do not. These only have sympathetic nervous system innervation. Okay, in the autonomic nervous system, activation of adrenergic neurons will result in A, increased heart rate, B, bronchodilation, C, increased light availability of the eye, D, all of the above, E, A and B only. Yeah, the answer here is all of the above. So if you recall, when you're in a sympathetic nervous system situation, you are in a fight or flight situation, that's the only time we'll be activating adrenergic neurons because the parasympathetic division doesn't use norepinephrine. Okay, so we'll definitely increase heart rate if we're in a fight or flight situation, definitely increase bronchodilation. This is the weird one because the distractor answer is like E. Increased light availability of the eye. If you recall when we talked about special senses, we said that your sympathetic nervous system dilated your pupil so you could get as much information about what was going on as possible. That would have been the better thing, but it's not on the test. Like I could have gone back through and also put up all the systems this semester and talked about how both branches fit in with them. I hope that you do that on your own and think about it and appreciate your glorious, magnificent body where, yes, even your nervous system is affecting things like your skin. All right, you can come down. In the parasympathetic nervous system, activating blank receptors will blank digestive organ activity. Somebody just woke up and he's being real cute and shy on the stairs. Okay, yeah, cholinergic neurons activating cholinergic receptors will increase digestive organ activity. Okay. Now let's look at actually some of these other things, because you could say, okay, well, activating nicotinic receptors in the parasympathetic nervous system, we would be activating those because we activate nicotinic receptors in both. It's true, but if it's the parasympathetic nervous system, nicotinic receptors would also increase digestive organ activity. In the sympathetic nervous system, activating blank receptors will blank adrenal medulla activity. Here, it's going to be nicotinic and increase, and this is weird because you might say, well, wait a minute, I thought nicotinic receptors were only on preganglionic neurons, because the muscarinic receptors are on targets, right? Right. And I would say, well, yeah, except for this one exception where the preganglionic neuron extends all the way away to the adrenal medulla and directly causes epinephrine release, and it's a cholinergic neuron binding to, releasing acetylcholine, which is binding to a nicotinic receptor on that target that is increasing the adrenal medulla to release epinephrine and norepinephrine. I think that sentence came out right. The point is that when your sympathetic nervous system is activated, we can also now dump hormones in. This is the one exception to that rule, where we're going to go straight, we're going to bypass the ganglion altogether, and the preganglionic neuron is going to synapse right on the adrenal medulla. Preganglionic neurons are cholinergic, and nicotinic receptors are always stimulatory, so we'll get our epinephrine and norepinephrine release. Those clumped together are called catecholamines. Be aware of that. And then now in the blood, they're going to be able to bind to targets and amplify the effects of what's going on at the synapse. I'm so close to being done. Activating cholinergic receptors in the parasympathetic nervous system will result in A, increased gastric secretion, B, decreased heart rate, C, bronchodilation, D, all of the above, E, A and B only. What do you think it does? I know it's a tricky one. But if we think about it, cholinergic receptors.
It's a tricky one for little boys.
It's a tricky one for little boys? Mm-hmm. It's not just tricky for little boys, it's tricky for college students too. But not really tricky, thought-provoking. So let's think about this. In the parasympathetic nervous system, if we activate cholinergic receptors, well, cholinergic receptors are found on every postganglionic neuron. Okay, so that's going to be stimulatory to our postganglionic neurons. So then the question is, on our targets, what are we going to do? Are those cholinergic receptors on our targets? And since it's a parasympathetic division, they are. But now they're muscarinic, not nicotinic, which means that they can have either a stimulatory effect or an inhibitory effect. And in this case, it's the parasympathetic division, resting and digesting. So we're going to increase gastric secretion. We're going to decrease heart rate. And the answer to this question is A and B only. It's the sympathetic nervous system that does bronchodilation. All right, binding of blank to adrenergic receptors will decrease heart contractility. A, epinephrine. B, acetylcholine. C, calcium. D, none of the above. E, A and B only. Ahaha, the answer is none of the above. I very rarely ask none of the above questions, so if it's there, you really maybe should think about it. But I've also told you that, so I could just ask one that's totally like throw that in there as an answer, and it's not the answer at all. I just want you thinking about questions, reading every word in your question, and I just want you thinking about answers, reading every word in your answers. This says binding of blank to adrenergic receptors will decrease heart contractility. Which branch of the nervous system uses adrenergic receptors? The sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is only using cholinergic neurons as both preganglionic and postganglionic neurons, which means that the targets we're using cholinergic receptors. Where we're different is that in the sympathetic division, the postganglionic neurons are adrenergic, which means in our sympathetic division, our targets have to have adrenergic receptors. In our sympathetic division, are we ever going to decrease heart rate? Never, not once. So, that answer is none of the above. And I guess that was it for our review questions. And if you have any more questions for me, go ahead and ask them in the Teachers Helping Students Succeed discussion board. Because the thing is, you can like watch your review video and then like go take a break, pick your nose, like, I don't know, like whatever you got to do. Email your teacher or post in the discussion board, I have a question about this, I'm really confused. Before you take your test, ask your teacher, but I'm only there tomorrow during class hours, lecture hours, not lab hours. So what's that, 9:30 to however many minutes later? But if you're there, I'll be there and I'll answer your questions. And then you can go into your test feeling confident, like you know all you need to know, take this little half a test, and then what's great is we're almost done. So you can take a big breath after that, relax. Maybe go meet some friends from 6 feet away, have a drink, I don't care, relax. The next day come back for your cumulative final and you're almost done. You've made it. You've done it. And your body helped you through it. I hope you love your body even more. I hope to see you in my 202 class if possible. And if not, be well, stay well. I hope that you make a great healthcare professional someday.